the importance of imagination. It's more important than knowledge. I think what Nate's saying indirectly is that when you can know something's the truth, and then your imagination can figure out how to make that truth work in ways that benefit and are related to what matters to you the most, it leads to always having something to talk about.
A lot of people don't end up doing the life insurance because they get paralysis by analysis. And they think that their first policy has to be the best policy and it's going to be perfect. But the reality is, if you can just start with something, you'll grow, because we'll get to it later in the book, but it talks about the fact that this is going to be a system of policies, not just one. Like, you're not going to be one and done. It's like our baseball coaches, y'all had them. You can't win a game with one swing.
What we have to realize is this is really about good and evil. We have to be very clear on what is good and what is evil. And money just helps fight that or exacerbate it, whichever side you're on. And so some of the greatest people I know that I would trust my life with don't have control of their time at all, because their money controls them, because they're a slave to a job.
Welcome to the Cashflow Legendz podcast with your hosts Nate, Brandon, and Brock. Remember, our insights are not direct financial advice, so consult with your financial team before making any decisions based on the topics discussed in this show.
Welcome back to Cashflow Legendz. Nate, Brock, and I are excited to be here. We're so thrilled that you are willing to take time to listen to us, watch our content, or if you're driving down the road, listening on a podcast, whatever your preferred method is, we're grateful. And we cannot say that enough, because Nate and I talked about this yesterday as he was driving into our little town. He said, it's just really hard to fathom that we get to record something that people sometimes choose to listen to that we would talk about, and we do talk about all the time. And it reminded me of something, Brock, that your dad said. I don't remember where he got it from. You may remember. Or it might have been his originally, where he said, what we're really doing is just documenting our life. And the alignment of it is just as a historical document, as far as track it and hit record. And that's a really cool thing. Nate, I see you about to say something.
Yeah, well, so we were supposed to host a live event Friday night. Me and Brandon were, and so at that event, I say we were supposed to host. So Brandon's niece ended up in the state championship for softball, and so at the last minute, he had to drop out, and so it was just me. But one of the things that I said to that group was just, the value of having a place to go, the value of being able to show up in a place where you hear something to sort of reinforce your thinking. But I said, we've been doing this over 7 years now, teaching this, and we never get tired of talking about it. And so, we never get tired of teaching it. We never get tired of just being in rooms where we're talking about it with other colleagues or whoever. So it's really cool that we get feedback from our podcast, as an example, where people say they take on the label as an avid listener, that, because the reality is we have a lot of different topics that we talk about, but our central theme and everything we talk about is whole life insurance. And so it's kind of laced into almost every conversation we have. And yet people are still leaning in and wanting to listen, because truth never gets old.
Well, Nate, we don't plan any of this for anybody listening. We have a framework of what we're going to talk about. We know where we're going to go. But I really think it's going to tie in perfectly to what we're talking about today in Becoming Your Own Banker. So we're on page 26 and 27. And on 27, it's a review of part 1. So the book Becoming Your Own Banker has parts in it. So part 1, we finished up in all of our previous episodes. And Nate, what you just alluded to, and I'm going to go to Brock first because he's being super quiet, and I don't like him to be that quiet that long. Nelson says, the importance of imagination. It's more important than knowledge. I think what Nate's saying indirectly is that when you can know something's the truth, and then your imagination can figure out how to make that truth work in ways that benefit and are related to what matters to you the most, it leads to always having something to talk about. So, Brock, in your world, imagination and what Nelson was saying as far as it's more important than knowledge, what's your thought on that?
My thought on that is I think back to my days in college and the professors that would teach. And they knew that I was in the financial planning world, and a lot of them followed me on social media and knew kind of the platform that I had. And what was funny was they would teach stuff and they would have knowledge about it, but then they would ask me and I would say, yeah, that could work. However, what about this, this, and this? Think through this imagination. And a lot of times, like, yeah, you want to have knowledge. Like that is your foundation. That's where you start. However, that's only the starting point. You got to have an imagination to take it to the next stage of, well, what else can we do? What more can we do? How can this come back into our life? And it's, my favorite topic about this is the velocity of money, where most people say, easiest example is, hey, you know what? I'm going to pay my kids and I'm going to put their money in a Roth IRA. Okay, well, then what? There's nothing. Like you invest the money and that's it. And then hopefully one day you pull it out. Well, what if instead we started at a whole life insurance policy and then took the dividends and put that into the Roth? And then as the cash value grew in the whole life policy, maybe we bought a real estate property and we started having that fund the Roth and then kept the dividends within the life insurance. Like there's a lot of imagination that goes into the actual knowledge of how finances work and just life works in general. It's the same in everything. We wouldn't have anything today in our world if it wasn't for imagination.
So good. And
I think
imagination. Go ahead, Nick.
So I remember early on when we first got started, is one of the common questions that we would get is, what can I use this for? And I would just kind of put it back on them. How many different ways can you use money in your life? And then they were like, well, I mean, there's almost an infinite amount of ways that you can use. And so because of that, it ties right back into, applying the concept and how many different ways you can use a whole life insurance policy in your life.
My favorite lines in Becoming Your Own Banker, which we'll get to later, but it's kind of summarizing, is on page 63, where Nelson makes the quote, "This is an exercise in imagination, reason, logic, and prophecy." And what he's basically saying is that you have to have the knowledge first, because right before that, he references, I hope this puts to rest any fears of the validity of what this really is. It's whole life insurance with a mutual company that's been around for hundreds of years, that has consistently paid dividends. No, they're not required to, but they have. And that is just the place and the product. The imagination, the creativity, the logic, the prophecy, the reason is what we get to do as the owners of those policies at those companies to get better and better and better at, as our dear friend James Nethery says, when you're the banker, you can do whatever you want. Now that freaks out a lot of people when you say that at first, if they're not practicing becoming your own banker. Because it just creates these weird vibes and feelings. They don't know how to process, you can do whatever you want. So maybe we touch on that a minute with imagination. When we're saying you can do whatever you want, what are we really saying as it relates to imagination? And maybe tie in premiums, Brock. Because Nelson used to say pennies in, pennies out, or peanuts in, peanuts out. And I really like that thought process.
A lot of people, I was listening to somebody today, I forget who it was, but they were talking about like a lot of people don't end up doing the life insurance because they get paralysis by analysis. And they think that their first policy has to be the best policy and it's going to be perfect. But the reality is, if you can just start with something, you'll grow, because we'll get to it later in the book, but it talks about the fact that this is going to be a system of policies, not just one. Like, you're not going to be one and done. It's like our baseball coaches, y'all had them. You can't win a game with one swing. You're not going to win a game with one swing. So you're going to win a game by having base hits and having a team. And it's the same thing with policies. It's like, you're going to start somewhere, and hopefully your life is going to continue to grow, and then you'll be able to do more because you understand it, and your systems will expand over time.
Oh,
Nelson says that this is actually a very, very simple process, but our emotions is ultimately what makes it complicated.
ooh, Nate, you just set that one up for me perfect. So yesterday I'm going through my quiet time in Bible study, and I come across this thought that I hope I always remember. When we're thinking about anything that's new to us, feelings are okay. Okay, that happens in our life. We have feelings about certain things, but it's a byproduct that should be following facts and faith. Now, we as believers, we don't shy away from the fact that our relationship with the Lord is the most important thing that we're trying to get better at every day. So, what are the facts related to something we're learning about? What faith is necessary that supports those facts? And then whatever feelings come from that is probably okay and healthy. But what normally happens when somebody hears whole life insurance is they immediately, just like I did, get into their feelings, which then supports what they think they're faithful about. Oh, yeah, the market's the best place to put my money only. Or, oh, yeah, the Roth IRA is the only place I can put my money. Or the 529 plan. Not that anything's wrong. And then they build the facts around that faith and those feelings. Because Nelson said this is an exercise in how we think. So you first have to
without ever asking themselves, why do I feel this way?
There you go. And we had this said to us by one of our newest members, clients. We say members. We're kind of hawing around between a very specific mechanical piece of the policy and how we're going to do this or we're going to do that. And he goes, you know what? This is the first one of many. Just set it up however you think and let's go. I'm like, this is the mindset that Brock's alluding to. This is a system of policies. Ryan Griggs says it best in his book, How to Buy Whole Life. He says you will never perfectly build a policy. It will be underbuilt or overbuilt.
Yep.
And I really like that. So then how do we work backwards from there? And your point, Brock, is why do I feel those ways? Why don't we ever lean into that? And what are the facts that support that?
Yeah.
And I think if we were willing to go on that journey, even if it isn't something you think you want to do, you're going to be able to articulate why.
That's right.
Nate says all the time, though, when you go on that journey, hardly ever can you articulate why you wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Which is pretty fascinating. So let's not get too stuck on imagination. Imagination's vital. Knowledge without action, like Brock talked about with those professors, they had the knowledge, but they weren't living it. So they knew that there was something missing. That's just what was said. Now we have to remember, why do we get all this information in the world? And if we start asking, why is it beneficial for us or how, and it isn't, we have to ask why. We have to keep going. Why? Why is this important? So to review part one, Nelson talks about creating a place to control the function of banking in our life. Sounds real concerning. It sounds not concerning. It sounds real in-depth. All he's saying is he uses a grocery store example. We can relate to a grocery store because it has product on the shelf. Product goes off the shelf. If we own the grocery store, we want to put it back on the shelf. That's the same thing with banking. We're putting deposits in the bank. We're taking withdrawals out of the bank, but we're not benefiting from the profitability of the bank. We're not getting all of the benefits. So Brock, touch on real quick the grocery business and simplify it. Let's say somebody just listening, they hop on right now and they're like, how does money and IBC and Cashflow Legendz and Nelson's book Becoming Your Own Banker in a grocery store? What the what?
It's a good question. We all have to put our money somewhere. It's going to reside first at the bank. It's your choice where it goes next. Most of us believe that as soon as we get paid, it just goes into something. The only thing that can do that is a 401k. But all the rest has to go to a bank first. And then we're going to purchase something later in the hopes that it brings money back. The question that we have to answer is, every time we go purchase those things after we've received our paycheck, do we want to give up the interest that is being earned with where it's at?
I'll add this piece because I had this conversation with somebody that is very savvy in the money world this week. And they said, very humbly, they're like, hey, tell me what you see from this perspective. And they had $1,000 a month car payment. Okay. And their words were, I make plenty of money, basically. I'm paraphrasing. They weren't saying it pompous or anything like that. The $1,000 doesn't bother me. I don't even notice it. I said, hey, if I came to your office and I said, would you rather, there's 4 years remaining on that $1,000 a month note. I said, would you rather give $48,000 away or keep it and keep control of it? And he's like, well, what a rhetorical question, Brandon. You know the answer. So I said, but you just told me that $1,000 a month doesn't really matter. But what we don't realize when we make a payment anywhere, like Brock just said perfectly, when we make a payment, it leaves our life. It doesn't disappear. It goes into somebody else's pocket until they know how to treat it best where it never leaves again. And that is the key piece Nelson was trying to get us to understand. That's what banks are doing with our deposits. What we do with it after we put money in the traditional bank is the most important thing we'll need to understand. And we want to be very clear. We are not saying you shouldn't put it in a 401k. We are not saying you shouldn't put it in the market. We are saying, have you compared it to other options? And would you keep doing that if you knew there was a different way? Maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't. But you would be educated enough to go, I know why I'm doing this, or I know why I'm not doing this, or I know why I'm doing them together. And that's where our good friend Caleb Gillums wrote the book, The And Asset. So important. This is not or. We don't do infinite banking and become your own banker or the market or real estate. It's you do this and you finance the things of life you're going to finance anyway. So that's important on the grocery store example.
Yeah, in the world of retail, loss prevention is extremely important. And so, like, if you ever go in a Ross department store, they've got dudes in black and yellow with loss prevention on their like they look like they're security guards, but essentially they're just trying to make sure like nobody's stealing anything. I remember a couple years ago there was a local Walmart that one of the guys that worked there, he was basically the loss prevention officer or whatever, and he would just walk around the store in street clothes all the time. Well, the reason why loss prevention is so important is because it severely impacts the profitability of the business. And so what Nelson was trying to help us understand is our money is our inventory. And if we are not going to treat our money better than we would treat someone else's money, then we are, in effect, metaphorically speaking, being a thief of our own business.
Good, Nate. Out of all the conversations that we get to have daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, I think the thing that's most relevant to me here lately is that almost all of us who have no concept of whole life and how it can be used and the banking function, all that, we're doing the best we can with the knowledge we have. So then we get introduced to a new possible idea, and as a former middle school principal, I can say this: where the public school system fails is teaching us to think about how we think. And so therefore we just take things at face value. So if me, Brock, or Nate were sitting with anyone else evaluating what they've been doing to this point, we already know they're doing the best they know how to do with what they've been given. Hardly anybody wakes up and goes, man, I hope I'm below average today. They wake up thinking, I'm doing the best I can with the knowledge I have. But then they get introduced to a new process or possibility. And then they have to go, why am I feeling like this doesn't make sense? And a big question to always ask is, what you're doing right now and the conclusions you're coming to, are you also asking yourself as compared to what? Like if you kept doing what you've been doing, are you certain with as much peace of mind and control as possible that it's going to get you to where you want to go? And what we find often is we don't even know where we want to go. Literally, we're just waking up, working, collecting a paycheck, government, taxes, inflation's getting a third of it or more. And then we wonder why things aren't happening the way we want them to. I see Brock chuckling. See, Brock figured this out a lot sooner than Nate and I. So we have to keep him humble to realize that he's partnered with guys that are slow learners. So, but it's the truth, isn't it, Brock? It is the truth. And it's by design. So Nelson talks about the money problem. If we don't recognize it and dive into it, we will begin to believe that we work half the year roughly between taxes, interest, inflation, and all the things built in for somebody else or something else. And nobody in their right mind, if I came up to them and said, hey, here's the salary that I'm willing to pay you, but you're only going to get half of it, or you're going to work half the year before I start paying you, would take that deal. Nobody. Which, if you really think about it, anybody who says they make $100,000 a year, they don't. If that's the income that was the salary they were promised, you could almost cut it in half. And that's not, I know you can, because I see numbers every day. Because what we see is somebody's making $100,000, they're only keeping $4,000 of it at most on average. So if these things are true, we then have to go, is there a better way? And Nate, you and I got brought to that forefront when we read Becoming Your Own Banker years and years ago. Brock, you came from it from a different angle because you already had some background and perspective in it. So correct me if I'm wrong, you didn't have to go through a deep, thorough what if, because it had been around you your whole life through your dad.
Correct.
Okay. So that
You
is
didn't
not
have to
the norm.
unlearn very much.
I didn't have to unlearn anything.
Yes.
I just learned from the start.
Yep. And I want to get generationally minded for just a second. The ripple effect that's going to start for Brock is very akin to the fallacy they talk about of putting your money in compounding interest and it never being interrupted. This is the true compounding interest of Brock knowing this and his parents knowing this and him starting from the get-go, and how that's going to have a ripple effect to his friends and his kids and his spouse one day and his grandkids and those kind of things, because that uninterrupted compounding knowledge that's being applied is going to ripple at a greater level because they are in control and have certainty. And Nelson says on page 26 that that's a pretty peaceful way to live. We don't think about it enough, but Nate says this often. What's the rate of return of peace of mind? You got to first know what peace of mind is for you. I attended my grandmother's funeral yesterday, had the privilege of speaking at it. Nate was there. It was a beautiful thing. It was a definite celebration. And the one thing that I know for sure is she had peace of mind of knowing who she was. Therefore, she got real clear early in her life on who she was in Jesus Christ. And she had a peace of mind of what her purpose was on this earth to glorify him. They never made a ton of money, but they always lived abundantly. And so we got to get clear on what that means to us. What does wealth mean to us? What does showing up mean to us? What does value mean to us? What we're saying is if what you're doing is not creating the ability to think about where you want to go and if it's going to get you there in a way that you feel really good about, then it's worth exploring. What's the worst thing you could do? Spend a year diving into it and you learn something new? And worst case, it's not for you. I mean, it's really that true. And that's why Nelson said it's that simple. That's why Nelson wrote the book, Becoming Your Own Banker, as he says, for the average Joe. This was not written for life insurance agents. He makes that very clear. Not a sales tool. It is to teach you that money has to reside somewhere. Nate, I know that look on your face. What you got?
Well, when you said that, it reminded me. So we've got a guy right now that we're mentoring, a younger guy in the business that we're mentoring one-on-one, and we share our decision making framework with him, and with others that we mentor and pour into. And it's simply, first is it pleasing to the Lord? Second is, what is the best case scenario? What's the worst case scenario? Can I live with the worst case scenario? And so for anybody listening, maybe use that framework for, is this something I need to lean into? First decide, like if you're listening to us and you're hearing the things that we're talking about, first decide, would this be pleasing to the Lord for me to just lean into? Because
Don't call Dave Ramsey.
not everybody that we work with is a follower of Christ, but a lot of them are. And so, if you have faith in the Lord, like lean into that, ask him to give you discernment, ask him to give you clarity on if we are the people that you need to be working with. And if you get peace about that, then the next step is go through best case, worst case. Can I live with the worst case? And Brandon, you just touched on the worst case. Worst case scenario is you're going to learn something new.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing. Brock and I were talking about Hebrews 12, 1 through 12 before we hit record. And that section is about discipline. And I'm going to simplify for my brain. When we have a relationship with the Lord, discipline is often love. And that is just something that makes people pucker up. Makes me. I don't like it. Because discipline to me is not something I want to experience. My natural inclination is to run from it, which then makes us realize how much we need a savior. Because it all started right there. And so this reality, try to circle the wagons a little bit, coming back into our conversations. And we have no problem discussing our faith because, one, we're proud to be Jesus's kids. I mean, God's kids, Jesus's siblings, all those things we're excited about. But what also we realize is that Brock's dad said this early on, and I always loved it when he said it. He said, what we have to realize is this is really about good and evil. We have to be very clear on what is good and what is evil. And money just helps fight that or exacerbate it, whichever side you're on. And so some of the greatest people I know that I would trust my life with don't have control of their time at all because their money controls them, because they're a slave to a job. I want to be very clear. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a job. I'm not saying you shouldn't get stressed by your job on occasion. I'm saying that if you can't think straight, are you willing to ask why? And just sit in that. Brock loves it because he loves that question. Why? And I think that's a good place to end. Nelson was basically saying, this is the way to do it. It's already the way that you've been taught to think about money. It's just a more efficient way with a better place. After you put your money in a bank, it's got to go somewhere after that. How much of it do you want to keep, or how much of it do you want to keep giving it away? And you just got to know at a high level what's going on to understand that you might want to take over that process instead of let somebody else control it for you. And it really is that simple. Whole life insurance, dividend paying with a mutual company is just the best place that he found to do that. And I would concur, having tried many, many other things. Guys, we appreciate your time, appreciate your insight. Anyone listening, if it's been beneficial to you at all, hit the like, subscribe buttons. Please share and leave us a comment. We always love to use that as content for anything else moving forward. And we'll keep walking through the book. We're going to start part 2 next recording or next episode. And this is going to be about Parkinson's Law. And Parkinson's Law is real. And it's something that I didn't even have a clue what it was until I read the book, but now I can't unsee it. So I see it in everyday life. And it's essentially what we'll dive into. Now you're thinking, how does a mindset about Parkinson's Law relate to money? It does, because it relates to our behavior. Y'all have a great one. We'll see you on the next one.